There is a night, the There is a night the elders of the valley still will not speak of directly. Even now, generations later, they tell this story sideways. They approach it the way you approach a sleeping lion, carefully, with respect, from a direction that gives you room to run. Because some truths are too large to look at straight on. And this one, this truth about a king and a shadow, and the terrible arithmetic of pride, this one cost an entire kingdom before it was finally learned. So sit close. The fire is burning low, and this story has been waiting for exactly this moment to find you. In the heart of a vast and ancient kingdom, where the savannah stretched to the edge of the known world, and the baobab trees stood like old gods with their arms flung wide, there ruled a king named Obara. And before we go further, understand this. Obara was not a villain, not a fool. He was by every honest measure a genuinely great man. His people ate well, his borders were safe, his courts were just, and his land was fertile. Children grew up strong under his reign. The rains came when they were supposed to, and the kingdom hummed with the deep contentment of people who feel seen and protected by the one who leads them. This is what makes his story dangerous. Not the fall of a bad man, the fall of a good one. It was not cruelty that undid Obara. It was the moment he looked beyond his borders and felt for the first time in his great and abundant life, genuinely small, the northern kingdoms with their diamond mines, the eastern empires with their ocean ports and rivers of gold, the ancient western dynasties with their libraries holding 1,000 years of knowledge. He looked at all of it and felt the hunger wake in him. Not the hunger of an empty stomach, the hunger of a full one that has just seen a larger table. He began to tax his people harder, push his armies further, demand more from the land than the land was willing to give. His oldest advisor, a small, fierce woman named Enkichi, who had watched 3 kings before him and seen 2 of them fall, came to him one evening and said, "My king, a tree that is always harvested and never watered will eventually give nothing but dust." Obara waved her away. "I did not ask for poetry," he said. "I asked for solutions." Enkichi bowed, but at the door she paused and said quietly, "The spirits are watching, my king. They always watch the proudest ones most closely." Obara laughed. He should not have laughed. It was the night of the new moon, the darkest night of the month, when the boundary between the living world and whatever lies beyond it is said to be at its thinnest, when the stranger arrived at the palace gates, tall, dressed in robes the color of the moonless sky, his face ageless, his eyes holding the torchlight a fraction too long, the way a mirror holds light when it has been breathing. He carried nothing, said only one sentence to the guards. "Tell your king I have come to make him the wealthiest ruler who ever lived." Obara received him alone. The stranger sat without being invited, with the ease of someone who does not recognize the authority of lesser beings, and smiled the smile of someone who already knows how a story ends. "I have heard of your ambitions, great king," he said. "The northern diamond mines, the eastern trade routes, the allegiance of every kingdom that has resisted you, gold beyond what your treasury can hold, all of it by sunrise. In exchange for one thing." "What thing?" said Obara. "Your shadow," the stranger said simply, "nothing more. The shadow that has followed you every day of your life without ever doing a single useful thing. You have never once thought about it. Give it to me freely, and everything I described is yours before the birds wake." Obara looked down at his shadow stretched long, across the throne room floor. He tried to think of one moment in 40 years when it had contributed anything to his life. He could not think of one. He said, "Done." The stranger crossed the floor, reached down, and lifted the shadow the way you lift a cloth from a table. Smooth, unhurried. The shadow came away without resistance, without sound, folded neatly into midnight robes. The stranger bowed and said, "The wealth arrives by morning." Then he walked backward into the darkness beyond the door and was simply gone. By sunrise, the kingdom had changed. Gold in the riverbeds, diamonds in the soil, merchant caravans on every road, letters of submission from 6 neighboring kingdoms. The treasury overflowed. The palace rebuilt itself in marble and gold. Obara sat on his golden throne and thought, "The old woman was wrong. Look what the spirits gave me." For the first month, everything was magnificent. Then the signs began. Slowly, the way curses always announce themselves. Not all at once, but in an accumulation of small wrongnesses that individually mean nothing and together mean everything. The crops nearest the palace stopped growing. Not dramatically, just a thinning of the soil. A reluctance in the earth that the farmers noticed and could not explain. The palace dogs stopped approaching the king, quietly removing themselves from every room he entered. His gray stallion, his companion of 8 years, trembled in his presence and made a sound the stable master described as the sound of an animal uncertain whether what it is looking at is alive. The birds fell silent when his procession moved through the market streets, every single bird. And then the children, who had always run toward him with their hands out and their faces open, began stopping at an invisible boundary when he approached, watching him pass with wide, still eyes, and slowly backing away. Their parents beat some of them for the disrespect. The children could not explain themselves. They only said, "He looks different. There is something wrong." Then came the morning Obara stood before his copper mirror and saw that his reflection was fading, not gone, but thin, translucent, a suggestion of a man, a figure seen through smoke. He sent for Nkichi immediately. She came, looked at his face, at the mirror, at the floor where no shadow lay, then back at his face with the expression of someone who has been dreading a conversation and is now inside it with no way out except through. "My king," she said, "what did you give away?" "Nothing of value," he said. But the words felt false in a way they had not before. "A man's shadow is not nothing," Nkichi said. "Your shadow is your connection to the living world, the proof of your presence among living things. Without it, you are becoming something in between, not fully alive, not gone, something the natural world has no name for. The land feels it. The animals feel it. The children feel it most clearly because they have not yet learned to distrust what they see. And soon your people will feel it too. And a king his people cannot feel is no king at all," Obara said quietly. Then from outside the palace walls came a sound that changed the temperature of the room. Gentle, almost soft. The sound of crops dying, not field by field, all at once. A vast, quiet collapse of living things that had held on as long as they could. Obara closed his eyes. When the great men had failed and the wise men had run out of wisdom, it was a child who stepped forward. Her name was Simi, 9 years old, daughter of a yam farmer whose fields had turned to ash in a single morning, small and serious with enormous still eyes and the habit of noticing everything and saying nothing until she was certain what she wanted to say. She had listened to the adults discuss the dying kingdom for weeks. They took her silence for incomprehension. She understood perfectly. She waited until her mother was occupied, put on her good wrapper, and walked through the palace gates while the guards were distracted. She found the king sitting alone on the stone steps of his palace. Not the throne, the steps, surrounded on every side by marble and gold and the accumulated dazzle of the stranger's wealth. A man in the middle of everything, with nothing. She sat down next to him without being invited. Obara looked at her, startled, then irritated, then something else entirely when he saw her face. A child who was not afraid of him, not impressed, simply looking at him the way you look at a problem you have decided to help with. "You sold something important, didn't you?" she said. It was not a question. "How do you know that?" he said. "Because you look like my uncle," she said. "He sold his farmland once for quick money. For a while, he was the richest man on the street. But then slowly, he stopped being himself. He kept living, but he stopped being real the way he had been real before. He had sold the thing that made him who he was." Obara was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I am the greatest king on this continent. I cannot take wisdom from a child." Simi stood and smoothed her wrapper. "Then stay here with your gold," she said, "while your people starve." She had taken 10 steps away when Obara said, "Wait." She turned around. "How did your uncle get his land back?" the king said. "He didn't," she said simply. "He waited too long, was too proud to admit the mistake before it became permanent. Pride is the most expensive thing there is. It makes you pay the whole cost of a mistake instead of just the early part, which is always cheaper." She looked at him steadily. "But you still have time, barely. Go back to where you made the deal, alone. At night. No crown, no robes, no guards, nothing. Go to the edge of the savannah, where the darkness begins, and speak the truth out loud. My grandmother told me that spirits can only permanently keep what you permanently abandon. You gave your shadow away as though it had no value. You have to go back and claim it as though it is everything, not as a trade. Just the plain truth, said clearly, with nothing held back." "And if it doesn't work," Obara said. "Then at least you will have been honest," she said. "And honesty, even when it comes too late, is better than what you have right now." That night, Obara removed his crown, set it quietly on the throne room floor, removed his robes, his sandals, and walked out through the servants' entrance in simple cloth, barefoot, alone. The night air was warm and smelled of dry grass and the deep, alive smell of the savannah. He walked for an hour until the city fell away, and the savannah opened ahead of him in the starlight, vast and dark, and completely indifferent to everything he had ever claimed about his own importance. He stopped at the edge of the grass, stood in the dark without rehearsing, without performing, just a man and the night and the truth of what he was. Then he spoke. "I was wrong," he said. The night absorbed the words without echo. "I had everything that matters, and I looked at it and felt small because I could see beyond it. I traded something ancient and real for something empty and dazzling. I abandoned my shadow as though it were worthless. I am here to take back what was always mine, not in exchange for anything, not as any new bargain. It belongs to me, and I belong to it. And the fact that I did not know that does not change the fact that it was always true." The silence after this was different. It had an attention in it, a quality of being heard. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, came a sound like something unfolding, like cloth smoothed across an enormous floor, like something finding its way home, and at Obara's bare feet, spreading slowly outward across the red earth in the starlight. His shadow returned. He stood and looked at it for a long time, pressed his foot into the ground and felt the earth respond, felt the aliveness of it rise through his soul like a conversation resumed after a silence that had gone on too long. He stood in the dark with his shadow at his feet and understood with a completeness no amount of gold had ever given him what he had nearly lost. Then he turned and walked home. The restoration came slowly in the direction of life. The soil softened. The crops returned. The animals came back to him one by one, first a young dog, then the horses, then finally his gray stallion pressing its great head against his chest and breathing the long, slow breath of a decision made. The birds returned to their noise. The children ran toward him again. And one morning, in the merchant quarter, a small boy grabbed his hand and demanded sweets with the passionate confidence of a child who has no doubt he will be heard. And Obara emptied every pocket he had and stood in the good morning light and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for far longer than he had admitted to himself. He distributed every coin of the stranger's gold to the families whose harvest had died and whose sons had been taken. He recalled his armies. He released the 6 kings from their coerced pledges. He called Enkichi to his throne room and said, "From today, you sit beside me, not behind me. And when I stop listening, which I will, you have my permission to embarrass me publicly until I start again." Enkichi laughed the laugh of a woman who has been patient for a very long time. Then he went himself, without ceremony, to the farm where Simi lived, brought seed on his own back, set it down in the dust, asked for her by name. She came out with a wooden spoon in her hand, as though a king's arrival was an interruption of something more important, which it probably was. Obara crouched to her level and said, "You saved a kingdom. Make sure you know that every day of your life. Wisdom and courage, and the willingness to say a true thing to someone who has the power to punish you for it. Those matter more than anything a stranger can promise you in the dark." Simi looked at him with those enormous, serious eyes. "Are you going to be all right?" she said. Obara looked at this 9-year-old girl who had walked alone into a palace to say the thing he most needed and least wanted to hear. And he said, "Yes, I think I am finally going to be all right. They say he ruled for 40 more years. And nobody called him the greatest king on the continent anymore. They called him something better. They called him a true one. A king who had looked clearly at his own worst impulses, followed them to their terrible conclusion, and come back from that conclusion without pretending the journey had not happened. Every year, on the anniversary of that night, he would sit on the palace steps as the sun went down. Not the throne, the steps, and any child who wanted to sit beside him was welcome. The wisest kings are not the ones who never fall. They are the ones who fall, look clearly at the ground beneath them, tell the truth about how they got there, and rise again carrying what they have learned not as shame, but as the most important thing they know. If this story moved something in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Welcome to Timeless Tales and Stories, where legends don't die. They just find new ears. Subscribe, because your next favorite story is already waiting for you.